Hello and welcome to the Analyst Inside Cricket. Happy New Year to you all from me, Simon Hughes,
And Happy New Year from me, Simon Mann.
and Happy New Year to Australia, who've beaten India and qualified for the World Test Championship final. Well played to them, a superb win in Sydney, a tense game, and a 3-1 outcome in the series. Now, this is how we predicted what might happen in the series a couple of months ago. So, Simon, you sat on the fence. You see, I told you you shouldn't have done that.
You're absolutely right, Yoz. Well done. You got it spot on. So, for once in your life, you predicted the outcome of a series correctly. Well done.
It wasn't looking too good, was it, when Australia lost the first test in Perth? And at that point, I mean, it was amazing, wasn't it, that India looked so good in that series, and Australia looked a rabble really. And Kohli got 100, and all those celebrations. I mean, Jaiswal, who the young player that you thought might struggle in Australian conditions, played well, and Australia looked a bit aging, really, didn't they, in that first test? And suddenly they've come back, and this is the first time they've won, having gone one down in a five-test series since the 1968-69 Frank Worrell series against the West Indies. So what's that? 50 years more than 50 years since they came back from 1-0 down in a five-test series. So a tremendous performance by them, actually. And it has looked, I think, even though these matches have ebbed and flowed, I feel, that you feel the onrushing tide of Australia as the series has progressed. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. I think Australia, apart from that first test match, have really dominated the series. They should have won it 4-1. I think they would have won it 4-1 apart from the weather problems they had in Brisbane. Remember, that test match was ruined by the weather. They were pushing for victory on the final day, and then the game was rained off. They did declare it something like 89-7 in their second innings, but they had that sizable first innings lead, and they were the team that were pushing for victory. So I think they were denied there. They probably would have won it, that match, and they would have taken the series 4-1. Yeah, they controlled the series, and their fast bowlers have been pretty remorseless, really. It's been their fast bowlers against Bumrah. Just look at some of the scores in the series, Yoz. 8 innings, completed innings, under 198. 6 of them from India and 2 from Australia. I mean, India's batting has just not been able to cope with that remorseless Australian pace attack. And it is the pace attack as well. And where should we start? I mean, the spin has barely played a part in the series. I say barely. And Nathan Lyon's taken 9 wickets, but it's been the pace bowlers that have done the damage. Cummins excellent. Starks played his part. Boland has been excellent. Hazelwood
Yeah.
played his part when he was fit. And 11 months away from the Ashes, Australia clearly are still going to be formidable when it comes to England challenging them out there with that pace attack. And of course, the fascinating thing: what sort of pitches will they play on? I mean, what about this surface? Was
Yeah.
it good for Test cricket, this one?
No, I thought it was poor. I mean, you looked at the first morning's play when Stark was bowling at Jaiswal and Cummins as well, and it was nipping around, bouncing off a length, flying through to the keeper at varying heights. You could see the overhead pictures of the pitch, which showed a lot of green grass, but also cracks underneath. Sydney is a funny ground, actually. You get all sorts of different surfaces there. It's a little bit unpredictable. Sometimes it can be a turning pitch, but over the last few years it's been a bit more like seamer friendly or a bit more unpredictable. And I think actually, what those low scores you mentioned, they're 8 scores of under 200 for both teams. I think there are a few reasons for that. One is actually, and this is something we've alluded to a bit before, the Kookaburra ball definitely is more in the bowler's favour now than it has been. It's got a thicker seam. The lacquer lasts longer on the ball. It stays harder for longer as well. I think they've actually felt the pressure from Dukes, from the English manufacturers, and have upped their game a bit and made the balls a bit higher quality. And as a result, the ball has helped the bowlers more. I think the pitches have been a bit spicier as well than traditional Australian pitches. I mean, the last time England toured Australia, the pitches were a bit more helpful, and they have been this time. And actually, I also think batters' techniques, are not that good. They don't kind of hang around and play the cautious game too much. They try to take the bowlers on. If the ball is doing a bit, they feel a ball's got their number. And actually, I liked Gideon Hay, the Australian cricket writer's sort of analogy today in his blog, which is called Cricket et al. It's a very good blog that he writes with Peter Lawler, actually. And he wrote that Baldrick, the character out of Blackadder, once wrote his name on a bullet. And someone said, well, why did you write your name on a bullet? And he said, well, it's because your name a bullet has always got your name on it. There's a bullet out there with your name on it. So if I write my name on a bullet, I'm not going to shoot myself, am I? So, maybe I'll escape. Well, that's a roundabout, rambly way of saying that a lot of batsmen felt there was a bullet with their name on it during this series, and as a result played slightly reckless at times or risky shots and got out.
Yeah, you've got two ageing players in that Indian side, Rohit Sharma, who did a Mike Dines. In the end, we speculated that he might, and he did, didn't he? He withdrew from the Test match, as Mike Dines did back in 1974-5, the Sydney Test match, which is the subject of our podcast series Headhunters, which you can find where, Yoz?
It's at patreon.com/theanalyst25, and it's a good thing to bring up that, because it's uncanny, isn't it, how both captains stood down for the Sydney Test. Mike Dines in 74-5 series after the first 3 tests, and this time Sharma after 4 tests, but of course he only played 3 because he missed the first test. So it's interesting that Sydney has caused that calamity in the camp in both cases. So you can find that series. It's so far a 4-part series, looking back at the 74-75 Ashes with Tomo and Lily. You can find that if you go to our sister site, the Analyst Plus, at patreon.com/theanalyst25. I suppose what we should say is that the bowling, the seam bowling, has been high quality. To give the batsman a bit of an excuse, Cummins, absolutely superb. And we posed this question, or you posed the question the other day, if England could sort of knock out one Australian player and give themselves more of a chance in the Ashes in 12 months' time, who would it be? And I said Cummins, and Cummins, 25 wickets in the series. He's just relentless, isn't he?
And runs as well.
And he got runs. Yeah, he averaged 20 with the bat as well. And he got most of the decisions right on the field. He's a very calm kind of captain, but obviously perceptive as well, and highly respected. There's great unity in that Australian camp. But Bumrah, bowling the skill that he showed with the ball as well. So in the same way as Tomo and Lily dominated that 74-75 series, the seamers in this series have also been pretty hard to deal with, actually, at times, equipped with this slightly enhanced Kookaburra ball.
So Rohit Sharma leaving himself out, he said it's not the end. He said it was a decision purely based on my form and what we needed to do for this test match. Is it your hunch? And, also Virat Kohli as well, 190 runs at 23.75 in this series. And those figures include 100 in that Perth test match. Admittedly, did come in when India were dominating. I think there was something like 270 for 2 in their second innings and totally on top. So, poor series for Kohli. We've already had Ashwin go from this Indian team in the middle of the series. Are we looking a bit of a changing of the guard, or do you think there's going to be a bit of clinging on? Because they do come to England in the summer. Are we talking about new captain and a kind of revamped middle order as well with no Kohli there?
I sort of think it is time for a change. And it's interesting, isn't it, that often you find with sportsmen, not always, but a lot of times you find that when they have kids, when they've had a couple of kids, young kids, their perspectives do change. And somehow cricket is not the be-all and end-all anymore, even subliminally. And both of them, Sharma missed that first test for paternity leave. Kohli's had a couple of kids. I just think your kind of desire is just sort of slightly eked away as a result. And Sharma, he's not the sort of person, Rohit Sharma is not the sort of person who works scrupulously at his game. He's not the cricket badger that we know, the likes of Joe Root, Steve Smith, etc. He's quite a sort of casual guy. You know, when he comes out to practice, he doesn't even wear pads sometimes. He just comes and hits a few half volleys. I remember watching India practice in the last series in England, and I set up a camera to film. It was the World Test Championship final, in fact, at the Oval, and I set up a camera to film the Indian players in the nets, four in a line. And Pujara, who was playing in that Test match, of course, who hasn't been picked in this series, had two pads, helmet, arm guard, chest pad. He had everything on. He looked like Michelin Man, and he was battling away in the net, fending it off. Rohit Sharma went in with one pad and two gloves, and just sort of stroked a few half volleys from some throwdowns. And he's that sort of guy. So if that doesn't work for him, I can't see him sort of going into the nets and spending hours and hours sort of tinkering with his technique. So I think possibly for him it could be the end. Yeah.
And time catches up with everyone in the end, and also the relentlessness of the cricket schedule probably catches up with a lot of players as well. Just going back to the point about the seam bowlers dominating the series and what that might mean for the Ashes next winter. I know everything's kind of all roads eventually seem to point to the Ashes, but I mean it is a talking point, and it is something that's come out of the series. Okay, the seam bowlers have dominated. Do England really need to play a spinner? Okay, of course, it depends on the pitches. You need to keep that option open. But is it? Do you think it's a possibility that England will say, actually, do we need a spinner, especially if Ben Stokes is struggling to bowl? Because you think on those surfaces that we've seen in the last few weeks, you want to keep four pace bowlers going as much as you possibly can. The relentlessness of the four pace bowlers creates pressure. We've seen that from England, in recent times. The fact they've had the four makes such a difference. But of course, you love to have the spinner as well. You love to have the spinner in your back pocket. But if Ben Stokes can't bowl and they want him in the team as captain and talisman, then is it a genuine possibility that England, I know, more than one Test match, actually consistently throughout the series, might say no, we're not going to go with a spinner.
Well, they start in Perth, don't they? The Ashes next time.
Yeah.
In the same way as they did in this series. And Perth, definitely, you don't need a spinner, I don't think. I mean, it's got so much bounce and pace, and batters struggle generally unless the ball's got soft. So it will depend, won't it? We're really speculating a year on, but I think it will depend how the fast bowlers perform in that Perth test. And if they do the job, then you can almost see England playing without a spinner in subsequent matches. I mean, it will depend a lot on the surface. When you get to the pink ball test, you probably will not have a spinner there. So that's 2 out of the 5. Then after that, it depends on the surfaces a little bit. If Melbourne looks really flat, you probably would have a spinner. Brisbane always has a bit of bounce for the spinner, actually. And Shane Warne always loved bowling there because he said it wasn't necessarily the spin, it was the lift, the bounce he got off the pitch. So it's a hard one to say at this point, isn't it? But I know what you're saying. I mean, if England had 4 really good pace bowlers, why leave one of them out for a spinner who's not going to bowl much? That does seem logical.
Especially if Ben Stokes can't bowl that much. I mean, he says, I want to get back to full fitness. I want to play my part. And there is a debate about what his role in the team is if he can't bowl. I mean, he has played as purely as a batter, but he didn't play in the first test in Multan, where he, in theory, I suppose he could have played as a batter. He left himself out, and Ollie Pope captain. Just going back to the Perth Test match this time round, and the role of a spinner in the game. India bowled out for 150, Australia bowled out for 104, and then in the second innings where India racked up 487, of course the spinner did come into it because you need to rest the pace bowlers, and that's why you want a spinner. You always want to have a spinner in your back pocket for those eventualities. And actually Nathan Lyon bowled 39 overs in the second innings, but admittedly India just had all that time to bat and they used it wisely, making 487 for 6 declared. Lyon 39 overs, 5 maidens, 2 for 96, doing that holding role which he does, and also also picking up a couple of wickets as well. So that's when you do need a spinner to be able to rotate the pace bowlers at the other end. And then Australia in their second innings, Washington Sundar bowled 15 overs and 2 for 48. Australia bowled out inside 60 overs, but largely it was the pace bowlers, Bumrah and Siraj, who did the damage. They took 6 wickets between them. Well, that's always the great debate, isn't it? When you're trying to pick a team, to get that balance right. What are we going to need for this game? But some games seem to happen so quickly now that you just go with the pace bowlers. It's over in 3 days. Do you actually need a slow bowler? I mean, go back to that last Test match in Hamilton where England's spinner Shoaib Bashir, he didn't bowl on the first day. England just bowled pace all day, and kind of paid for it the next day and afterwards, because they were a bit knackered, weren't they? Deep into the game, because they bowled so much, and Ben Stokes, who bowled so much on that first day, ended up getting injured. Anyway, it's an interesting debate, and we'll have many of them between now and 11 months' time. What's your hunch, actually, Yoz? I mean, again, this is very speculative. What's your hunch? Having seen this series and having seen England recently, what sort of shape are England in vis-a-vis Australia going into the Ashes? I mean, I think there's a lot of there's been some optimism around. Oh yeah, it's an aging Australian side. England have got this way of playing. They can go there and they can challenge them at last. Do you see it like that 11 months out, or do you think feels like same old after seeing Australia take India down?
I mean, look, it's about making runs. As we've always said in Australia, it's about making enough runs to give your bowlers something to play with, doesn't it? Isn't it? And it's all about England's batting, and if they can get those 300 to 400 scores consistently, because I think they'll have the bowlers. With the emergence of Gus Atkinson and Bryden Carson, potentially Archer, possibly to come back, Mark Wood, etc. They've got the bowlers, really, potentially. It's just whether they'll get enough runs. And I think we'll see over the summer, won't we, when they play India. And I feel England will beat India in the summer in a 5-test series. They just need to get a couple of those batters in really good form. Will Harry Brook be able to play that slightly sort of mad method in Australia? He might have to temper it a bit. And it's whether the batsmen can kind of mature enough, the younger players, Bethel as well, to be able to play the long innings. Because you look at someone like Steve Smith, and he's slightly past his best now, isn't he? He's slightly past his best. He's missing a few of those balls on the pads, which he used to flick away for 4, and looking a little bit vulnerable outside off stump. But he's still got 200s in this series and averaged 35, because he knows how to build an innings and to stay in and stick through those difficult periods. And that's what England will have to do, because there will be difficult periods. There'll be Cummins at you with the second or third spell and start reverse swinging it or something. You've got to kind of be able to adapt your game to the different circumstances, and that's where England haven't sometimes been good enough. My hunch, actually, I think England will win the Ashes. I think they'll win the Ashes back in a year's time, because I just think they've got enough strength now in depth to be able to mount a serious challenge, and Australia will be another year older. So I just think the balance just could tip slightly, but I think it's going to be a tremendous tussle.
So the series is over. Quite a spicy series at times, Yoz. And someone who livened it up was young Sam Constas. I mean, he was out today playing. I mean, it really was watching England bat the way he played today. He came out there and he was determined to take it on early. Prasad Krishna actually sprayed the new ball all over the place. The ball was going down the leg side, lots of 4-bys, and Constas was also trying to take it on. Eventually, just skywing up in the air. It really was like watching England play. So, I mean, that's going to be a fascinating thing to watch develop over the next year. Australia go to Sri Lanka, they play the World Test Championship final, then the Ashes. Constas at the top of the order. Is he going to continue to go on playing like that, or was it a tactic designed for particular circumstances, i.e. against Jasprit Bumrah to try to disrupt him, and then today, try to get Australia off to a flyer chasing a small total, and it worked actually. okay, he didn't make loads of runs, but there was a very quick opening partnership that got Australia moving along, and they, in the end, they won quite comfortably. But there was no Jasprit Bumrah, and if Bumrah had been bowling on that pitch today, it might have been a very different game, but we'll never know. And in the end, basically, he kind of broke himself in the last game at Melbourne, bowling all those overs and taking those wickets. But it was too much for him, and he had a back injury and didn't bowl today, and that really helped Australia. Krishna came back and picked up some wickets, but he went, he conceded so many runs early on. What about Sam Constant and the whole debate about whether he was being intimidated or not? One coach, Andrew McDonald, saying it was pretty intimidating. I'm thinking of the incident on the end of the first day when he was at the non-striker's end and India took the wicket and they kind of not quite celebrated his face, but some of them ran towards him. Bumrah turned towards Constant, who'd held Bumrah up. And then previously, of course, there was an incident where Kohli kind of barged into him in Melbourne. Yeah, he got India's beans going, didn't he, Sam Constant?
Well, in a way, Kohli started it, didn't he, with that shoulder barge, which was completely unnecessary, and he changed direction to make sure he made contact with Constance. I mean, then ironically, New Year's Day at the Prime Minister's residence, I gather that Constance went up to Kohli and they had a long chat, and he asked for his autograph. So they certainly made it up there. I mean, he was picked to kind of get under the Indians' skin, and I think it worked. And I think that actually probably took the intent a bit too far. Actually, he became a bit too extreme, and even his own mentor Shane Watson was quite surprised at some of the shots he played so early on in the two Test matches that he played in. But I think it was quite a clever tactic actually, and although in the end you look at his scores, one score of 60, excellent, and a couple of 20s and one failure. It doesn't look great, it doesn't look amazing, but actually it had an impact. And even today, as you mentioned, the fact that he was coming up the wicket and playing quite big shots against those quicker bowlers did make them lose their direction. And that happens when you've got batters moving around the crease like that. It does put you off as a bowler. And, then a couple of balls go flying down the leg side for 4 byes or 4 wides, and you're up and running. So even though he only got 22, he did have an impact. I thought he shouldn't have got involved in that situation on the first evening, because Khawaja was just delaying, as batsmen do, to make sure it was the last over of the day and just taking his time. He wasn't being overdone. He was just, sort of adjusting his gloves and things like that, not being hurried by Bumrah, who was trying to rush through his over. And Constance then shouldn't have got involved because it wasn't really his job to say anything. And that was a bit cocky, actually, and a bit slightly disrespectful. I mean, a 19-year-old sort of saying something to Bumrah, what I would, if it was me as Bumrah, I would have got quite annoyed. But then, in a way, that's the impact that you can have when you do that. So I thought it was a bit of a storm in a teacup, really. I mean, the Indians storming around him afterwards, well, that's inevitable. When you've got someone there who's said a few things, you do kind of go and stare at them afterwards. I don't know. I don't mind that, really. There was no physical contact. It's all right. Kohli's incident was worse.
Yeah, you shouldn't be bumping into players on the field.
Yeah,
I'm so ambivalent about it. I think it does add to the story of the series, doesn't it? It adds to the drama, and I have to say, after what happened on that first evening, I made sure that I was in place, ready to watch the start of the second day, because you just wonder what was going to kick off at the start of the second day. So it's funny, isn't it? You think, well, this is not cricket. You shouldn't be doing these sorts of things on the field, and you should behave and all that. But it does add to the spice. It does get people interested. It does get people talking. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or not. I suppose as long as it doesn't spill over too much. And look, the match referee, did he take action? Well, he took action against Kohli, fined him 20% of his match fee for a barge. You probably could say, well, actually, he should have been a bit harsher, really. If you have physical contact on the field, okay, if you do it if you want to, but pay the consequences for it. Didn't really happen. 20% is neither here nor there, is it, for a player? And then that drama at the end of the first day. I think if that had been me, Bumrah, I probably would have reacted in the same sort of way. He just held himself back,
Yeah.
Bumrah, didn't he, from really going up to Constas, but he sort of turned towards him and gave him that stare. Didn't stop Cody running from slip, or, right by Constas, and then I think he had time to think about it, didn't he? He had time to think about, by the time he got to Bumrah at the non-striker's end, just to calm down a bit and not actually go at Constas at the non-strikers. And what did Khawaja say about Sam Constas? I think he said something like, he's the most arrogant 19-year-old I've come across, and also one of the most likeable. So he's kind of got that mixture. I mean, it's certainly going to spice up the Ashes if he's going to play like that at the top of the order, or
Yeah,
whether
I
he's
mean, I
just going
don't
to actually
think he
just play
will.
his normal game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he will be able to play like that consistently because, like today, I mean, it was a horror shot he got out to. It was an absolutely disgusting shot.
Massive hack,
Just
wasn't it?
Just a hack and went straight up in the air. And it was a bit, it was a poorly judged shot because I think some of his shots in that first innings when he ramped Bumrah were very clever because he recognised that Bumrah was bowling that consistent channel outside off, and actually there was no protection there, and it was a shot he backed himself to play. Fine, but Krishna, who he got out to today, gets extra bounce, and to try and just mow him over deep wicket, there was a man out at deep square leg anyway. There were quite a few scouts out, so that was a poorly judged shot. But if he can kind of balance that slightly outrageousness with some more sensible batting as well, I think he's got a big future. I mean, just on Bumrah, by the way, one of the things I feel is a shame is that these 5 Test series are so compressed into a short space of time. So, if you're looking at who's going to win the Ashes in a year's time, it could be the survival of the fittest. Which team lost least bowlers, because the Test matches after the first 2 anyway, the Test matches come thick and fast, and India just. Bumrah had nothing left to give, did he? He gave everything in that Melbourne Test. He then bowled well in the first innings with Sydney, and then something broke or gave way. And it's a shame when you get these fantastic contests, top of the table clash, best 2 teams in the world potentially, or in theory, and one of them is now bereft of their leading strike bowler because the Test matches are so close together. Compare that with the great series which we've profiled in our sister site, the 74-75 Ashes, and the 5th Test wasn't played until the end of January. And England had 3 matches against state teams between the 4th Test in Sydney and the 5th Test in Adelaide to get together and find some more form and so on. Whereas now you've got 3 or 4 Test matches compressed into 3.5 weeks. And it is so tough on the bowlers, especially if you're playing that 4-man attack with not much spin bowling and a lot of quick turnarounds with batting teams not batting for very long, so you're out there again as a bowler without a day's rest. It's a shame that you can't get the best team on the field for each match.
Yeah, it would have been great today to see a fit Bumrah bowling on that surface, with Australia needing 160 to win. He might not have won the game for India, but he might well have done. I mean, there was certainly enough in the pitch, but India started really badly, and I think that was the point. Australia got a bit of a flyer, and India then took some wickets. But actually, we have one person we haven't mentioned is Bo Webster in his first Test match, who had a good game. Looking ahead, Australia just sort of changing their side a bit. Constas coming in this series, and Bo Webster coming in this series for Mitch Marsh. Boland back in the side. You think of an ageing Australian side, but they're a competitive. They're a competitive nation when it comes to cricket. Australia, and they're going to have more than 11 good cricketers in the country, aren't they? So if 1 or 2 drop out, you feel there's always going to be some waiting in the wings to pick up the mantle. I mean, Webster played at Gloucestershire in the summer, and made a very good impression there. He only played 4 championship matches, but he averaged 58 and took 16 wickets at 21. But he's 31 years of age, isn't he? So he's been around a while. So there's another 30-year-old in, but it doesn't matter, I suppose, how old you are, as long as you're good enough. Just talking about that, what about Khawaja then? 38 years of age. What was his tally in the series? 184 runs at 20, but then having to face that damn new ball against Bumrah.
Tough, yeah, very tough. I mean, he just looks a bit too static as a player now. he's got a very back foot method. He can't get forward, so you tend to bowl very full to him, and he does look vulnerable early on. He's getting into his late 30s now. He's a good foil for Constance if they're going to continue with that opening pair. He's quite. At times, he's a bit of a languid runner between the wickets as well, isn't he? He has to shout at him to get off his backside and run up the wicket for a quick single. So, not sure that it necessarily will work for him in a year's time. But I can see them moving on from him. I thought Webster played really well. He, as you say, he's 31. He knows his game, but he sort of took the initiative in the first innings, and even today. Played a positive role coming in when there was a slight wobble. He looks a hell of a slip fielder, doesn't he? As well. He's got these bucket-like hands. He's like an automatic replacement for Cameron Green. Huge hands, grasping the ball at third slip, towering over everyone else, and looked very confident. Yeah, I thought he did well, actually. I thought he was a real find.
Yeah, and they've got Cameron Green to come back as well. He's missed this series through injury, so if all is well with him, then they can bring him back in next winter. So yeah, they've got some options. Australia. Should we finish, Oz, just on? We can go back to the pitch. You said you didn't think it was a very good pitch, and it was very green. And Justin Langer said, "I've never seen a Sydney pitch as green as this." Glenn McGrath said, "I've never seen a Sydney pitch as green as this as well." I see Sonny Gavaskar making some comments. If however many wickets that fell on the first day had fallen in a Test match in India, everyone would be moaning. All the ex-England cricketers and ex-Australian cricketers, if it's an Australian match, would be moaning about the surface. Is he right to sort of allude to that? He said no ex-Indian cricketer moaned about the surface, although he did say that cows could have grazed on it when he saw it on the first day, which is kind of like an implicit criticism there. Discuss. Is there sort of kind of like a double standard there? England. The England players didn't complain about any of the surfaces, did they? But I suppose there's media comment on a surface, isn't there, when England go to India and it's a bit of a dry pitch at the start of the game.
It's so difficult to get the balance right. Groundsmanship, curatorship, as the Aussies call it, is a fine art. It's it's a science, isn't it? It's so difficult. I thought that pitch wasn't good enough, really. It was a bit substandard. A batsman was never in. You only got two guys got 50 in the match, and they were both playing, well, certainly in the case of Rishabh Pant, playing outrageous shots to get to 50. Bo Webster got a 50 in the first innings. He had a bit of luck, but he actually played pretty well. But I think that tells you one story, really. The bowlers were a little bit too dominant. What was the highest score in the game? 185. That's not good enough. Having said that, there was no sort of loss of enthusiasm from the crowd, was there? So it's still got 47,000 in today for the third day. 837,000 people watched this series, attended the matches. Fantastic, really. They clearly enjoyed the spicy pitches and the confrontations on the field. That certainly kept the story going. I thought that pitch was poor, actually, to be honest, to side with the Indians. And I don't like a pitch which has uneven bounce. If it moves sideways, if it maybe reverse swings later or spins or something, that's fine. I don't like a pitch where the ball bounces unpredictably and sort of almost takes your head off from just short of a length.
I think in terms of pitch comment, I think in terms of pitch comment, people should just call it as it is. And I think what happens sometimes, possibly in India, is that people say, no, this pitch is fine, when actually it's not. But I hope that if a pitch is poor in England or Australia, people, that those people who work in the media, former players, would just call it out and say, yeah, it wasn't a great service. I don't think this was a great service. England have sometimes produced pitches, haven't they? Here, there was one at Lords, which was really green, and actually a Test match that India won. You need that. I think home advantage. You can sort of see why people go towards it, but I don't think you should doctor the pitch. But if you do doctor the pitch, then actually say that's what we're doing. And what I loved about Pakistan in the winter is that they said, right, get some new spinners in, play on a used pitch, get those big fans out to try and dry out the surface in the next Test match in Rawalpindi. There was no pretense there. There was no subterfuge, was it? It was out in the open, and they said, right, we're going to go for this. We're going to go for some dry surfaces. Whether that's the right thing to do for Test cricket in general is another debate. But actually, they weren't. They were totally out in the open about it, and I actually quite admired them for that.
So let's finish there by congratulating Australia, and obviously they are now playing obviously now they're playing the World Test Championship final against South Africa at Lords in the summer. I noticed South Africa celebrating their own achievement, scored 615 against Pakistan in Cape Town and have knocked them over for 190. So Pakistan now following on in the Cape Town Test. So no batsman seem to be struggling in Cape Town. Ryan Rickleton, 259. Amazing. At number 4. So South Africa showing punching above their weight, certainly in this last sort of cycle of Test match cricket. And they will be appearing in that final against Australia. It could be a good game, couldn't it?
Yeah, well, let's hope so. What you don't want is a one-sided game. We've had a couple of interesting finals so far, and we've had 4 different teams in the 3 finals. We've had India in a couple of finals, we've had Australia in a couple of finals, New Zealand, South Africa, no England. Well, that should be their incentive next time round to actually be competitive, try to make the World Test Championship final, at least to be in contention going into the closing series of the next World Test Championship cycle. Well, they haven't been so far. They've been actually pretty ordinary in the World Test Championship. But they've got the players, and they should be there, and they should be taking it seriously. Actually, Pat Cummins today saying, we take this seriously. We want to be World Test champions. Yeah, there's
that's quite right.
Something there for England to take note of.
Yeah. Now, of course, there is an Ashes coming up very shortly, isn't there? The women's Ashes. So England already out in Australia, and with a combination of T20 ODIs and 1 Test match, which will be concluded by the end of this month. So that's an exciting opportunity with 1 or 2 new young players in that England women's side as well to challenge the dominance of Australia. So that will be an interesting series to watch, and we'll cover that periodically over the next month as well. And don't forget, as we mentioned before, our sister site, the Analyst Plus, which has got lots of interesting content, including that so far 4-part series about the 74-75 Ashes. The 5th episode of that series will be uploaded next week, and in the meantime you can get to it by going to patreon.com/theanalyst25.